Do I really look like a guy with a plan? You know what I am? I'm a dog chasing cars. I wouldn't know what to do with one if I caught it. You know, I just do things. On today's Unnamed Real Estate Podcast. You know, every time, just when I'm turning on the camera and everything and I'm doing a little countdown, I'll see something on the screen and it's like, what is that? Is that a gray hair? So, hi guys, this is Charles Ray Dawson, Associate Broker with ProStar Realty. This is the Unnamed Real Estate Podcast, and this is episode 33. And as my teaser that I recorded, we just got through and everything else, I'm not a big fan of plans. And mostly because, you know, in a chaotic environment, it pays to be flexible. It pays to be able to adjust to things on the fly. So I record the show over multiple days, and I'll sit there and I'll, record, the numbers on Wednesday because I'm pulling it out that morning. I'll do the graphic and everything, get it all set up. And then Thursday rolls around, and that's generally when I do the teaser, which is the very first part. Usually the bulk in that. Yesterday, I actually did record the section we're going to cover where I am going to answer a viewer's question about whether or not foreclosures are going to hit. And like all good plans, of mice and men, off dang line, and the close up the video, processing it while it's rendering and everything like that. I check my news sites and stuff like that, and I see this article about some random bank in China that I didn't actually realize existed, but they're in the middle of a liquidity crisis. They're actually having not quite a bank run, which is where everybody starts showing up to your bank and starting to want to get their money go out because of fractional account deposits and whatnot. It's not like if you have $1,000 in the bank, they have $1,000 squirreled away on a shelf somewhere with your name on it. They've loaned that money out. Bank run happens when everybody starts going in there to pull their deposits out, and they don't have enough cash to cover all the deposits. It's not quite a run that's happening over there. And what it is, it's an issue with their rotating debt that they do as dollar bonds. But so this is what I would like to do. I would like to run the numbers real quick. Then I'm going to come back to a brief intro about the foreclosure thing, and then we're going to do a wrap up and almost like an addendum to that, and then we'll close out the day. So let's look at the numbers first. Now the numbers for September 15th, 2021. Actives this week are 7,079, which is up 88 from the week before, and the first time we broke over 7,000 this year. Of that 7,000, 2,535 of them are new listings, up 222 from last week. Our pendings this week are 1,969, up 267 from the week before, and we also have an additional 1,183 under contracts looking for backups, which is up 102. Our contracts with buyer's contingency are at 114, which is up 7. And our close for last week is 2,196, which is up 464 from the week prior. And coming soon to an MLS near you is 861 listings coming soon. One thing I should point out with those Wednesday numbers is I did a check back to see where we were at this time last year. And this time last year, we were actually at 8,000 listings, active listings on the MLS. So we're 1,000 under where we were last year. So, but we are definitely still trending up, and we are seeing, the markets and everything get better from a buyer standpoint as this come around. But just as a point of reference, I don't think I mentioned this enough. Based on our population amount here in Maricopa County and where we're at, we should be looking at anywhere between 18,000 and 20,000 active listings going on, with a days on market, anywhere between 40 to 60 days. And we're not seeing that at all. In fact, I did notice this week that our days on market have actually gone up to 9 days on market. We were there at 8 days on market. So we are trending in the right direction that way, but keep an eye on all this. So this next segment is going to be covering answering a question whether or not there's going to be a chunk of foreclosures coming on the market soon. And I'm going to go back through the history of the crash, because the crash actually does impact, cause that wave of foreclosures. And I'm going to do the addendum on the end of it. A couple of weeks ago, I received a question about whether or not we were going to see a housing crash because of large amounts of foreclosures coming on the market. Or if not a crash, are the large amount of foreclosures going to impact our market in a negative direction for a homeowner, which is a positive direction for a home buyer? And as you can see by this headline on the article, I was just reading for research. The professionals don't think it's going to happen, and I don't think it's going to happen. Ultimately, questions like this are always rooted in people who survived the crash of '08 or watched their parents deal with the crash of '08, and they want to know if that can happen again. So to really get the understanding out there that why I don't expect to see something like that happen again, you have to have more of a history and an understanding of what actually happened when what happened. So starting from the beginning, we're gonna just go with this route. I have originally started off just scribbling stuff on my notepad and whatnot, and then decided to put it into the spreadsheet so you can see it pretty easier. But to understand the crash, you have to understand the bubble. And understand the bubble, you have to understand things about human psychology and economics. So up until September 2002, Arizona had a very, very, very solid, regular market, right? Supply and demand were pretty much in sync with each other. There was not a big jump one way or the other, as far back as the numbers I could find go. And then, in September 2nd, something happened, and it was the magic number 5. So this chart right here, I've listed out the Cromford Report, supply and demand numbers, the interest rates, the price per square foot, a rental price per square foot, and the rental vacancy percentage. And my broker, Steve, actually pointed this out since he lived through those times and still has the scars to show it. He was telling me about how the rental vacancy had more of an impact than I was aware of. And we'll get to these two other columns here in a bit. So in September 2002, you see the interest rate for the first time in pretty much anybody's lifetime hit under 6%. Now, let's see if I can still have this chart up here. And this right here is an example of the interest rate for a home loan going all the way back to April 1971, which is where I was at 7.29%. Now, your host here was a whole screaming 3 months old when that happened. All right. So when I say these are the lowest rates I've seen in my lifetime, I'm literally saying these are the lowest rates I've seen in my lifetime. All right. Because I was born in January. All right. In April, the interest rate was 7.29. And you watch it spike up all the way up to 18.44 average, right, in October of 1981. And then it starts this slow decline over time. We burned through the inflation, and the inflations that were going on in the 80s and whatnot. We hit a 10%. Everybody's happy at 10% because they just lived through 18. And it keeps going down until this magic number right here. Now, people are down here, all right, they've seen 7s, all right? And you got to remember, this is a generational thing. So if I am just born in 1971, my parents, who are in their 70s now, or at least my father is, I'm not going to ask my mom that, that's impolite, all right? My father was owning his first home, and I think he bought it in Billings, and he would have bought it right around here, like 79, 78. And 76, we're talking 8% interest rates back then. So for the baby boomer generation, they had never seen anything but 8s and 7s. And that was a big thing for them. All right. They might have seen 6s if they'd had a really good credit rating and whatnot and had a large amount down. But remember, we didn't have all the different mechanisms and mortgage policies that we have today. And so this kicks in, and then all of a sudden in this day, September, all right, 2002, you can see we're in the 6s. All right. In that September, we suddenly see, my mouse skills suck. There's October, there's September, 5.99. All of a sudden people see a 5 at the beginning in the interest rate, and that is practically free money for them. This time period, I was considering buying a house. I thought that was an incredible interest rate too. So we get there, and that starts to run up. We have, up until that point, a nice, well-balanced market. 106 houses with 103 people looking at them. 3 houses are going to go wanting, but they'll get picked up next month, so we're not too worried about that. Your price per square foot was $101.40 per square foot, and you were renting that same house at 71 cents a square foot per month. Now, I based all of these numbers that I use later on in a 1,600 square foot house, but this is a comparison you need to see. And your vacancy rate was 11%, which meant 1 out of 10 houses out there for rent were empty, looking for a new renter. But the run-up starts. And as the run-up starts, the housing prices went up. And as housing prices go up, the demand eventually falls off because people just can't afford the houses. Because if you notice, between September 02 and April 05, all right, the interest rates don't really change that much. They're still rattling around right there at the 6%, even though the price of housings have gone up. Which means, remember the chart that I showed you a while ago, and in fact I might still have it here. As your interest rate goes up, for the same price house, you pay more. All right. In this case, if you bought a house at 3% interest rate for $350,000, it would cost you about $1,475 for the principal and interest. But if that rate went up to 5, all of a sudden you're paying $1,878, which is $403 more. Make sense? Plus, you have less houses between those two price points. So, actually, that's with a cheaper house. To get the same price, you're buying a smaller house, and there's less houses out there for sale at that. So that's the beginning of the run-up. But I would, at that point, I wouldn't necessarily say we're in a bubble. Right? Things have run up. All right, demand has backed off like it's supposed to. Supply has increased because there's now that houses are worth more, people are more willing to sell them. All right, it's time to downsize. Let's look at selling the house at the top of the market. And, at April 05, there's a lot of people out there who are thinking that it was the top of the market, but demand was really, really low. So this creates that run up. And then between April 05 and a year later, right, supply has gone up even farther. Demand has gone up. All right. The interest rate is half a point higher than what we'd been looking at before, but where your price per square foot now tops out in May of 06 at $190 a square foot, which you'd be happy to pay today. All right. But that's what you start seeing going on in that, is that now we're starting to talk. Now we're talking a bubble. Why is there a 50-point difference between here and there? Because that's when speculation really kicks off in that year period. And you can watch that on the charts. The price per square foot, April 5th comes around and bam, it just heads for the moon. Right? That is your irrational bubble that starts kicking in. Now, your rental prices per square feet have gone up a little bit, but they're still at that 0.7, 0.64, 70 cents per square foot. And your vacancies have even gone down a little bit. And your vacancies are going down because less people can afford to buy at that. And just to let you know when you're seriously in a bubble, and you can see right here, I calculated out 1,600 square foot house at the average price per square foot, and got $1,135 a month for your rent to get that 1,600 square foot house. That same house, borrowing the entire amount to purchase, and back there in 06, and this is something else I really need to touch, back there in 05 and 06, there were loans out there, they were called ninja loans. No income, no job, no document. I mean, they were just throwing money away, right? But to borrow to buy that house at $190 a square foot, you are now paying $2,217. And one of the other follow-up numbers that I did on that to look it up was that 1,600 square foot house that you'd purchase at $190 a square foot was going to be a $305,000 house. Right? That's the power of that interest rate right there. Right? Now we are full on in the bubble, and that is the top of that price point before things started to correct. Now, I also want to point out, and I've mentioned this before, I was working for a title company at the time. We saw this June 2nd of 2006, because what we saw in June 2nd of 2006 is that there were less transactions done across the board in May than there was the month before that. And I distinctly remember saying, party's over, last one out, turn out the lights. This is where the correction starts. Now, we were all expecting a correction, okay? And you can see the correction happen as, right? Or demand is 93. That's about average. Supply is very, very large, but people are just not buying the houses because, effectively, they cost so much. And with 9% vacancy, all right, it's cheaper to rent. You're saving $1,100 renting than buying at that. And most rational people did that at that point. So you watch the market just sort of pause from May to November 7th, all right, or November 07. There is this year plus pause where things are moving in the background, but you're not seeing the large price per square foot collapse. You do see it come down $30 a square foot or $29 a square foot. That's 15% or so. That's within a correction, right? And 10% is a normal correction, 20% is a bad correction. And everybody was saying, okay, we're going to have a bad correction and we're going to come down. But in November 07, then the free fall starts. And it is just a full-on free fall. Now, something else I really want to point out here that I noticed is I keep seeing hints that the population actually went down in 08 and 07. Or 09. I cannot find real data to provide that. Either they jump from decade to decade because of the census map, or in the one chart that I did see that I was doing yearly, there's this huge block between 1990 and 2010. There's like a 20-year gap there. So there just wasn't any information to come out. But there was talk about, or we actually lost people in Maricopa County moving out for various reasons. So as we were going into this point of free fall, right, demand or supply is still high, but by March 09, you actually see the demand come back up. And the reason for that is we're no longer just seeing 6s on our interest rate. We're now seeing 4s. Remember how people got excited back here when they saw a 5 for the first time. Well, now they're seeing 4s, and you start seeing the correction start to happen. All right, vacancies 18%. So we're talking 1 out of every 5 houses out there, rental houses, are empty. All right, and the price per square foot is still the same. The rental price per square foot we're at 68. So we're now well into the crash, and there was one of the major things that happened with the crash of 08, all right, because remember, this is not a sudden thing. For a lot of people, they might have just noticed it was a sudden thing because all of a sudden CNN and the news is talking to them about the crash. But we hovered there, all right, through 06, started to come down in 07, and you see that slight little curve. It's a nice, normal real estate correction, like any market will have a correction when it gets a little over exuberant and whatnot. But that 08 is when all the wheels come off and it just, drops like a rock, right? And we go from $161 a square foot, right? Coming from 190 to 161 hurts, right? But it's not that much of a killer. But from 190 to 83, or 190 to 160, 161 to 83 in the course of a year and a half, that's a serious fall. And that's the first big crash. And you look at 08 on the charts, and it is nothing but almost a straight line down. Right? And we have this sudden huge vacancy rate. So now we're at the crash, and we hit 83, which is pretty bad. All right. Our interest rate's at 4.85, but we started to recover. And you can see right there in March of 09, the correction just stops. All right. We are no longer dropping like a rock. We are just stopping. And the reason for that is you can look. Remember how the fives, an interest rate of a 5 suddenly made everything change? Well, when we suddenly saw 4s, all right, and we went from 5.79 to 5.7, 507. There's March, 4.85. All right, we dropped down on all of a sudden, and just like back here in 2002, March of 2002, when we saw a 5 for the first time, and everybody started getting excited. When everybody saw a 4, everybody got excited again, and they start coming back into the market. So that was our first recovery point. That's our very first recovery point, and that's why we're suddenly looking. Here's demand right here. Demand has never been over 100, right? All the way up to this point, and then suddenly everybody wants to get back into the game. So that should have kicked off a recovery. We have a little hiccup. All right. That little hiccup, and a lot of people don't realize this little hiccup because all they can hear is doom and gloom for the last 2 years. And they're used to hearing it. What that little hiccup was, and what I call this the lost year. All right. It's actually a lost 2-year period, but it starts pretty much in March when we started to recover. And then we lose it all relatively quickly afterwards. And we drop down to the lowest that we had on record, going back from ever, $79.13 price per square foot. And why did that happen? Our interest rates are low. Our demand is high. Right? It's because supply is low. All right. Now we don't have enough housing. Now we have low supply. That should mean we have high demand. That should be watching the prices go up. But what happened here in this time period, because this demand at this point really should have been much higher than that with a supply that low, is that there was a tax benefit that was passed by Congress during this time period trying to turn the market around. And what it did is it was going to allow you to use your closing costs as a tax write-off on your taxes. It was supposed to help people buy houses and get back in the market. Problem is, we'd already recovered when that thing came in. We were on the way track. This should have supercharged it, though. But what it did instead is because the human psychology of the buyer at that point in time, people were still afraid to buy. People wanted to make sure that they had seen things recover for a while before they decided to get in. They were still worrying that the crash might happen all over again. Is that the people who were brave enough to purchase at that time, back then, 2010, 2011, whatnot, they went and moved their personal plans up. And so people who normally would have bought in 2011 wound up buying in 2010 and 2009. That brought that tranche of buyers out of the normal ecology of where they would have been moving into the market at that time. It pulled them forward in time 6 months to a year, leaving us with a slight deficit in demand later on. I hope that makes sense, and it's not very intuitive, especially when you're looking at these numbers, but that demand had been where it needed to be at that point. Our recovery would have gone up. It would have been a smoother glide, smoother climb, instead of having this suddenly, down $4 from 2 years before. It almost arrested the recovery by pulling the buyers forward in time to where they came in earlier. So that's what happens right around August 11th. Now here we are. We're a decade later, all right? And as of this month, all right, our supply is at 29.2. Why? Because we don't have houses out there. All right. Part of the reason why we don't have houses out there is because we didn't build them during this time period. Let me show you this chart right here, which I stole from the Cronford report. As you can see, population growth goes on quite nicely, 2.8%, 2.6%, 2.4%. All right. You get to the point, but we're building more housing units than our population is growing. And this works well for a aging population. As kids grow up and they leave the house, they're suddenly creating two households instead of the one household that they were in. And so you do need to build more houses, because as the kid leaves and go, and when we're talking housing, we're not just talking, single family dwellings. We're talking about apartments. And so we're used to seeing that. And there's the sudden drop in population right here. Okay. And this is, like I said, this is just doing the population growth. And this is also census information. Some of the issues that would come up that I saw about the possible loss of population is because we had an illegal immigrant migration out of Arizona because of some of the legislation that came in during that time period. Right. But because of the crash of '08, all right, at this point, remember, this is 2006 when we're at 4.4, all right? Our supply was already at 184. We had 184 houses out there with 93 buyers, 2 houses for every buyer. Right. So there's a reason why they quit. They quit building at that time point. Right. Hey, we have too many houses, so they start backing it all off, and then the crash hits, and then they really drop off all the way down to 2011, where we only added 0.4%. That's what would be 4 houses for every 1,000 houses in existence out there. Right. In all of 2011, you see that right about here, because hey, there's your low supply right there. We're not building houses fast enough anymore, and we have never got to the point where we're building houses again. This chart right here ends at 2019. All right, this chart right here does not include 2020 with COVID era, and I have seen that our housing starts and our permits are higher this year than they were last year. That's not anything I want to know. I want to know if they're higher than 2019, because we need at least parity right here. And preferably to pass, because we have this, all this area in here is our housing deficit. These are the houses that are not being built. We could lose a certain amount of that to make up the surplus, but now we don't have that surplus anymore. Now we need to start building back into that. So what does this have to do with foreclosures? What this has to do with watching a foreclosure rate is that back in May of 06, November of 07, all right, when our supply is 184, 07, 213, all right, all the way through March 09, 165, you could not sell your house for what you owed on it. There's a couple things that were going on with that. The housing is already dropping from 06 to here. Your house is worth less. If you need to sell it to get out from underneath the mortgage that you can no longer pay, that mortgage that's sitting at 6%, you have to go into a short sale, or the bank takes it, and then there's that becomes a huge surplus feeding frenzy that we see 09, 2010. And we don't have that projected out on the board right now. Right? And right now, our average price per square foot is $262 a square foot. Now, to really blow your mind, our rents are now $1.35 a square foot, with a 5% vacancy. So you don't really have that as an option anymore. The rentals for a 1,600 square foot is $2,160 a month to rent a 1,600 square foot house on average, right? Your average PITI is going to be $2,109. So it is still literally, as expensive as everything seems to be, it is still cheaper to buy than it is to rent. And as people wind up getting rid of their houses, getting out of their houses because they can't make the mortgage payment and they're looking at a foreclosure, we're looking at the growth that we've had in the last year, much less the last 2 years. Most people are going to be able to sell their house, take a chunk of change out of it, still at least break even, and go on to their new housing situation before the bank winds up having to get it. All right. And it's that bank coming in, creating a foreclosed property, creating an unoccupied property on your street that then gets broken into, vandalized, damaged by unhappy people leaving, or transients or whatnot coming in, neighborhood kids, breaking into the house to play. Not saying I've done that myself, but hey, it happens. You don't see that huge foreclosure crash with these numbers as we're seeing. To do that, we would have to have that long 2-year period here that I wish I could show you on the chart. But, from that '05, April of '05 to the May of '06, where things just sort of hovered forever, right? Before the crash actually happened. And it was like '06, and then it's November '07 is when everything really starts coming loose. But like I said, that's just a normal correction right there. The number's smaller, but it's a normal correction at that point. And then you don't really see that kind of drop. So I hope this answers your question. Is we going to get a whole bunch of foreclosures on the market? I don't see it. If you have anybody out there that you know of who has been in forbearance on their loan and needs to communicate with their bank about how they're going to get out of that, most of the banks out there are just taking the balance and throwing it on the end of the loan. They are not interested in foreclosing on your house. The feds have been very serious with the banks, explaining if you wind up foreclosing on somebody, we're holding you responsible. So you better have a good answer for it. So people are able to renegotiate their loans. They're able to sell their house out. You're just not going to see that big surge coming in. Thank you much. So rewatched the last couple minutes of that video that we just finished up on, and when I noticed, I'm actually wearing the same shirt I was wearing 2 days ago. Don't worry, it was washed. At least I assume so. It was hanging up with all the other clean clothes. My house is magic. It's so cool. I take a shirt off, I leave it on the floor. 2 days later, it is washed and hanging up in my closet, and I will never sell that house just for that little magic, household gnome, leprechaun, or whatever we got that's running around doing my laundry. I'm really appreciative of that. And the other thing I noticed, besides house leprechauns, is that, we only need to discuss and I should have touched on this more. We went through a cycle there where houses were already starting to trending down before the crash hit. Remember, the crash hit did not start in real estate. It started in the financial sector. It was the financial sector with the Lehman Brothers coming apart. Mostly, and a lot of it is because they were holding really bad loans and whatnot. But that crash should not have been as catastrophic to the real estate side of the house if we didn't have so many houses that were basically underwater, but they weren't underwater by a lot. They were just underwater enough to make it, there wasn't enough equity to cover the paper that was written on it. Now, normally, banks would protect themselves in this position two ways. The first way is you need to come in with 20% down. Now remember, previously I was talking about corrections. A market correction, a normal market correction would run you about 10%. A bad one would run you 20%. So by the bank telling you needed to come up with 20% down, and they're only going to lend you 80%, that means they're covered. All right, and it's safe for them to loan money out to you, because even if we do have a bad correction, you the homeowner, well, you're just losing your equity. The bank's not losing their equity. And that system worked out really, really well. But then things come around and we start going, well, how can we improve the system? Like all great plans. Hey, it works. Let's make it better. We get all the smart people together in a room and they start coming up with great ways of making what works better. And they came up with under 20% loans. All right, FHA comes in. We start seeing that 3.5% FHA loan, which meant, and it used to be a 3%, which meant there was still 17% floating out there that the bank would be exposed to. So you had mortgage insurance, and the mortgage insurance would come in, and you, the homeowner, the borrower, would pay a premium to have basically an insurance policy covering the bank if the bank lost money because of that 17% spread. And that too worked out really well. All right. Take a correction, and just because we're having a market correction does not mean we suddenly have a lot of people getting foreclosed on. But when you have that perfect combination of very over-leveraged homes, right? And back in the day, this is how I bought my first house. We bought that house on an 80-20 loan. And what an 80-20 loan was is you get the first loan covering 80% of the of your purchase price. Your second loan coming in is a second, and it sits in second position, and it's covering the other 20%. So you actually have two loans, one at the 80% interest rate, and then that 20% that you're sitting there and you're paying a higher interest rate on. And most of these banks would have a mortgage servicing company, those people you write the check to, and you would write one check to that company, the servicer, and they'd split the money between the two banks. And that also worked really good for time, as long as you don't have a correction. And even if you do have a correction, just because the market value of your house is less than what you owe on it, you don't lock in the loss until you sell. It's just like stocks. You buy stocks at 50 and you look at it this week and it's 45. Right? You have not lost $5 yet until you sell it at 45, because you can hold on to it for a couple months and next thing you know it's up to 60 and now you just made 10. But when you're at that point where all of a sudden you have a lot of things that, people who are underwater, if they didn't have to sell, they would have been fine. But we had two things kick off from there. One, adjustable rate mortgages. People were signing a loan that the rate itself, right? They're getting a low introductory interest rate. You might see this with cars, credit cards, or whatever. That low introductory interest rate is sitting there. And with your low introductory interest rate, you can make those payments all day long because they're relatively low. Well, if that interest rate adjusts up, you're suddenly having to make a bigger interest rate payment. And so people started getting their mortgage was going up tremendously. Now they don't have the money. Now they got into these loans and they're lying to themselves two different ways, right? I'm saying very specifically, right? It takes two people for a lie. The first person says the words, the second person actually believes them, right? And people were bought into the concept of we are always going to be able to refinance out. Right. We will have equity in our house. We can always refinance. We'll just get another zero down loan to refinance out and we'll stabilize at the lower rate because we'll just do another APR. And there were people out there who I knew this guy once. He must have refinanced his house like 3 different times in the course of 2 years. And he was always getting in that extra month of not having to make a payment. So when you have a bunch of people on the market doing exactly that, and planning for being able to refinance out. When the Lehman Brothers crash hit, there's a huge sucking sound in the economy, and that's all of the money out there available to lend suddenly disappearing, which means all these people who had planned themselves to be able to refinance out that loan when the interest rate spiked up suddenly couldn't, and all those APRs suddenly disappeared. Or they went to refinance their loan and it was at a higher rate than they could get because lending practices really, really tightened up there at the whole time. So you really got that perfect storm. So this was the original plan, and this is where I'd be ending this story right now, and we'd be just going straight to credit. But like I said, when I was done recording this thing, I found this article, and what happened to us with Lehman Brothers starting to crash is happening today in China. China has way overbuilt for their population and their need. In fact, there's an article I was seeing this morning where they actually demoed 15 multi-story office buildings that they built, and in the anticipation that these buildings were going to be needed. And they never got used. So they were just sitting up there taking up space. So they finally decided to knock these buildings down that they had just built. And China right now is really on the tip of a bubble right now when it comes to their markets, when it comes to real estate. And it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the next couple of weeks. But their major bank, their major lending bank, this is not one that people actually go down to leave their deposits or writes checks off. This is one of those financial banks that basically loans money to other banks. They're having a really hard time because on their books they are over indebted. They owe more than they're bringing in. And normally what they would do is when a bond came matured and came due, they would just go borrow more money to pay off that bond. And but now they don't have that ability right now. And so there's some concern that China might have a financial crisis kick off. China has certain tools in their tool bags that we did not have back in our time period in '08. Because they can, their government controls the economy. I mean, controls the economy. If the government wants to go and goes to a lender to this bank, they can literally put a gun to their head and say, loan them the money. So they might have enough mechanisms in place that they're not going to have this crash. But what does this mean to you in Arizona? I don't know. But it could have an impact because China is such a large part of the world market, and we do live in ultimately a world market right now. If you can envision the dollar that you are borrowing to buy that house might not actually be an American dollar. That money might be coming from some overseas investment firm that's investing in the U.S. and figures, hey, we got $1 million. Where can we put it that we safely we get a decent return on? I know, let's lend it to Americans to buy houses. So if China starts having that problem with their money issues, you can see how that contagion could spread out among the rest of the world, and we'd be having an issue on that. So let's keep an eye on that. But ultimately, I'm not concerned about the foreclosure issue coming in and this huge wave of foreclosures suddenly hitting the market right now. And that's ultimately because we haven't had the big long drawdown. Our equity, household equity is much, much higher than we were in '08. The ability, we don't have the adjustable rate mortgages that are going to force people to refinance here at some time. We do have a lot of cash staying in the market, especially, coming out of California. People are still moving in here, bringing in cash from their sales there. So, watch this space, watch this storyline. But if you're planning in the next year or so to purchase a house, or to sell a house, I would not let a potential foreclosure wave influence your thinking. I would encourage you, make the decisions based on the information we have in hands and the way things are going right now and the way things are going to be going when it's time for you to transition out of your house or into a new house. So that pretty much wraps up this week. Next week will probably be a lot smaller episode because I am going to be on the road for most of next week. I'll be coming in Wednesday night, so next Thursday's show should be pretty tight. But thank you much for watching. You guys go have a great day and a great week.